Hi, everyone. Good evening. All right, let's maybe just begin with a blessing. We're gonna be looking at some really special stuff tonight, some really sacred stuff tonight. So it's worth stuff that's worth blessing. Let's say a blessing over Torah study, which ends la sok b'divrei Torah, thanking God for allowing ourselves to really to really soak ourselves, to really immerse ourselves in words of Torah, beautiful words tonight of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. All right, this is really like I want to take us on a journey over the next few weeks into some of the into the Holy of Holies, so to speak. We spent a lot of time with King David, right? As we look at biblical poetry, we're inevitably thinking about King David because of the way that King David has become associated with the Psalms, the way the Psalms have been attributed to King David. We talked about that a little bit even last week. But tonight, we're going to start talking about King Solomon. Now, King Solomon is a complicated figure in the Tanakh, mostly in the middle section, the books of Kings, Samuel and Kings. King Solomon is one of the successful kings of Israel, one of the great kings of Israel, known for his, what is he known for? Everybody say it once, known for his wisdom. But also known for building the temple in Jerusalem. But that was promised to David. It was King Solomon that actually built the temple and built the temple and amassed an incredible amount of wealth. And really those King Solomon's days were like the glory years of the dynasty of the kingdom of Judah. So King Solomon is remembered in glory, heroically almost. But the truth is that when we read the story, go back and read the story of King Solomon. We're not going to do that tonight, but if you go back, he appears on the scene very young and manipulates his way into the kingship. He has a sort of like special relationship with his father and his mother, who is Bathsheba, the woman that David saw bathing on the roof, right? As the old Leonard Cohen song goes. And she was his favorite wife, but illicit wife. And somehow Solomon manages to push all the other brothers aside and ascend to power. And immediately he just starts killing people. He just starts killing all of his suspected adversaries, including the general in King David's army. So he is ruthless, he is violent, he is incredibly self-interested. And even, and yet he's wise. I mean, the great thing about King Solomon, God says, okay, you can have anything you want. And Solomon, this is the key point in Solomon's life. Solomon asks, oh, I'll take wisdom, thank you very much. And God loves that because God loves wisdom. So God says, oh, if that's what you want, then I'm going to make you really wise. But even in his moments of wisdom, what's that Solomonic wisdom that we all know? It's cutting the baby in half, right? Like that famous moment where Solomon, two women are arguing over a baby, and one of them says, oh, she stole my child because her child died, and the other one says, no, this is my child. And King Solomon's great solution, for which he becomes known as the wisest of kings, is to suggest that they'll cut the baby in half. And then the way that plays out is you probably remember one of the women says, no, it's okay, let her keep it. And he goes, aha, that's the real mother. So wise. So, everybody was in awe. But I mean, that's it. That's the moment. Cut the baby in half. Because it's like, even in his moments of greatest wisdom, there's something harsh and arrogant and unrelenting about King Solomon. Okay, but that's just the figure that we know from our I'm not going to call them history books, but the books which record our histories. But in Jewish literature, Solomon isn't just known for his story. He's known also for these 3 books that have been attributed to him: the Song of Songs, the Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes. Okay, all of which begin with a kind of, this is the Song of Solomon. This is by Solomon. Except for Ecclesiastes, we'll get to eventually, which seems to be the same figure, but he now calls himself something different, Kohelet. Okay, but he becomes known for these pieces, and in that way, Solomon ends up also being one of our greatest poets. Solomon has left a repository of just some of the most exquisite this week language that we can find in the Hebrew Bible, and then different kinds of poetry. Next week we're going to see the poetry of Proverbs, which is like ethical teachings in poetic form, and then finally Ecclesiastes, which is a whole philosophical journey unto itself that we'll just have to sink into when we get there. Okay, so you have these 3 books, and they are attributed to Solomon. What I would like to do, and I just want to see the reason that we're starting with Song of Songs, and the reason that we're moving in the order that I suggested, is because I once heard this idea that King Solomon wrote the Song of Songs when he was a young man, and then he wrote the book of Proverbs in his middle age, and then he wrote the book of Ecclesiastes in his old age. I just thought that was such a cool idea, because if you start to think about what these books are, it makes sense. And you hear these things and you just wonder if your rabbi's just kind of passing on, Baba Mice's ancient sort of aphorisms. But the truth is, this idea appears in a midrash, and I want to just start by showing you this midrash, this rabbinic teaching on the Song of Songs. The commentary on the Song of Songs is it could fill libraries and libraries. I mean, our people have been obsessed with this book. But here is a source sheet tonight, and if you take a look at it, you'll see the first midrash there. I finally found where this idea comes from, and here it is. Rabbi Yonatan said, Rabbi Yonatan Amar, Shir Hashirim K'tav Tchila. Song of Songs was written first, V'achar kach Mishlei, V'achar kach Kohelet. After that, Proverbs, and after that, Ecclesiastes. Okay, so Umaisi la Rabbi Yonatan mi Derish Eretz, and Rabbi Yonatan proved this. I even have record that King Solomon actually wrote these books, let alone when he wrote them. But Rabbi Yonatan proved this from just looking at the way of the world. For when a person is young, he speaks words of song. And when he grows into adult, he speaks words of instruction. And when he becomes old, words of emptiness. Okay, so let's just pause for a second. That's the framework that I want to use. Some idea that our tradition has that Solomon wrote the Song of Songs in the fullness of his youth. And then eventually we will look at Book of Proverbs as if it is a book written out of the middle of life. And eventually look at Ecclesiastes as if it is an old man's wisdom. And I think we should study all of these books for weeks and weeks and weeks at a time, but we're gonna do this as a kind of trilogy. I almost called it the Solomonic Cycle. I want to call these books the Solomonic Cycle, and then I Googled that and found out that has a certain resonance in the occult. So we're leaving that aside. But these 3 books, I want to think of them as a kind of a cycle, as a series. And in moving through these 3 books, what we'll do is get to know the character and the evolution maybe of a poet, of a man, of a life. Let's just like for 1 minute stay on this midrash, and I want to ask you, what is the meaning of that? Does that make sense to you? That in youth someone would write love songs, and in middle age someone would write proverbs, wisdom, words of instruction, and then in old age one would just, well, it's hard to even know what this means, but write about emptiness. Like, does that, do you read that and think, well, that makes sense? Okay, Rabbi Yonatan taught this, so I'll give the first words to our own Rabbi Yonatan.
So I want to call attention to one thing, which is this phrase Derish Eretz, the way of the world, is often used by the rabbis to refer to sex. And I don't think that's an accident here. I mean, the Song of Songs is quite sexual, right? And I think he's talking about, that Rabbi Yonatan is at least hinting to kind of this very innocent sort of love in youth that matures and sometimes in old age is not necessarily, I will say, but maybe Solomon was one of these cases, can be left lacking. Okay, good. All right. I think Yonatan is right to search for hidden allusions to the erotic, because that is what we are going to, that's a lot of what we're going to be doing tonight. And Derish Eretz can be a kind of a euphemism for sex. Yonatan is right about that. I think it's at least used in a more straightforward way as well, but maybe it has that hint, that allusion. So let's keep our eyes on that. And yeah, I mean, like, maybe that's right, that like youth is the time of eros, of sexuality, of growing sexuality, of excitement, of love and lust, and all that is one of the dominant themes of the first part of our lives, right? So that will be the framework that I want us to bring into this reading of Song of Songs. So is it the reading, the poetry of a young man, a young lover, or, and I offer this as well, is it the poetry of an old man writing about his young love, right? Like that's another way to look at this, right? And again, this isn't, we know Solomon to have written these poems, and we know Solomon to have written these poems in his youth, but this is the way the tradition records and remembers these poems. So let's keep it in that context. The figure of Solomon appears in the Song of Songs, so it'll be important for us to think about who that figure is and what he's up to at this stage in his life. Okay, one more thought, Emil.
It's just an interesting reversal of how we assume, the Gemara to go, that like wise old rabbi. Now it's like the assumption is that when you get old, you get bleak, or you get, or havalim, whatever that means, but yeah. It's, I don't know, it seems to reverse like the general attitude of the Gemara on its head.
Yeah, that's great. There's something else that's happening here, Emil notices. In the journey of life, there's a kind of descent from exuberance to like a seriousness, and then eventually into a kind of, what is emptiness, bitterness? If you know the book of, this is a mysterious phrasing, words of emptiness, but if you know the book of Kohelet, of Ecclesiastes, you know that there's something, it's like Stoic philosophy. There's something very Stoic, very serious, very, and some have even said nihilistic about it. Just like it's all emptiness, nothing matters, right? So, and Emil says, it's interesting, it's like the wise old king, the wise old rabbi, these are figures that are celebrated in our tradition. So what does it mean to think of King Solomon as actually either like, maybe you could think of an arc of his life where it starts in joy and then maybe rises in a certain way, but you lose some of the fun, you lose some of the exuberance, some of the ecstasy, and then eventually you really lose it, okay? So let's keep track of this journey and what we are seeing in these sort of three faces of Solomon as we look at these poems. Okay, now let's get to our material for the night. Let's get to the Song of Songs, which it's the best. mean, it's just the best. I think when I first started this class, I said, where's the greatest poetry in the Hebrew Bible? And three voices at once: Song of Songs. And I meant Psalms. But you're right. I mean, Song of Songs has a special place. It's read by many traditions in full every Friday before Kabbalat Shabbat. And it has been seen by Rashi and other interpreters as an allegory for the love that exists between God and Israel, which, is on one hand a way of kind of sanitizing it. It was not really about two human beings wanting each other sexually. It's about like God and us. But even saying that is so strange. Like, oh, so the metaphor for God and us is sexuality, is sensuality, right? So you will read translations, you'll find translations where they're like all of the sex has been sort of written out. It's all like, and when I finally reach you in your holy city of Jerusalem, I will worship you. And like, it doesn't read like love poetry at all. But as you'll soon see, both of those elements are that they're not wrong that it's meant allegorically, but it's meant both ways, right? It's meant both ways. And so it isn't just saying, oh, this is actually about the love between God and Israel, but actually saying, yeah, the way you understand the love between God and human beings is to think about the love that you feel for another human being, right? So much so that there's a tension here. There's a nervousness here around, I mean, how does this appear in the Bible? The rabbis are freaked out by it. And famously, the rabbis are discussing which books should be in the Bible and which should be out. And the majority of rabbis say, don't put Song of Songs in the Bible. It's just too lurid. And Rabbi Akiva famously comes forth and says, Kol HaKitvim Kadoshim, all the scriptures are holy, V'shirashim Kadosh HaKadoshim. But Song of Songs is the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies. When you use that language, like Rabbi Akiva is very smart because he's doing the same thing Song of Songs does, which is to use the language. The Holy of Holies is the place inside the temple where only the priest could go once a year. The Sanctum Sanctorum, the inner reaches of the temple. Shir HaShirim, Kadosh HaKadoshim. There's a lot of wordplay there, but Song of Songs is at once the most shocking book of the Bible, and Rabbi Akiva says, this is it. This is the pinnacle. Yeah, this is the holiest book in the Bible. So we'll think about that now as we head into it. Okay. There's one other thing, though, that I want, just like thinking about Solomon and Solomon the lover. Solomon the lover. Let's think about Solomon the lover. We might as well mention some of Solomon's exploits as a lover, because we have record of those as well, and they are not complimentary. I mean, maybe complimentary by numbers, but not in any other way. Take a look at I said Solomon is like, oh, remember this glorious king, but he is a scary figure. In some ways, he's also a disastrous figure in a very glaring way that we often overlook. Take a look at this next text here that describes some of Solomon's loving exploits. King Solomon, this is towards the end of his reign, loved many foreign women in addition to Pharaoh's daughter. Doesn't sound good, Pharaoh's daughter, right? King Solomon loved many foreign women in addition to Pharaoh's daughter. Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite. They don't mention these nations stam for no reason. These are our enemies. Phoenician and Hittite women, from the nations of which the Eternal had said to the Israelites, none of you shall join them, and none of them shall join you, lest they turn your heart away to follow their gods. Okay, I want to just note that it's all of these women, but these women who will turn Solomon's heart away to follow their gods. And I want to state the obvious thing to modern ears, which is that like women now are being kind of cast as the temptress, the lure, that's true as well. But also just note the way that there's this competition between like our God and other gods, and Solomon is wavering, and he's wavering because of his love for these women. Okay, so such Solomon clung to and loved. He had, here are the numbers, 700 royal wives and 300 concubines. And his wives turned, that's 1,000, right? And his wives turned his heart away. In his old age, his wives turned away Solomon's heart after other gods, and he was not as wholeheartedly devoted to the eternal his God as his father David had been. Not by a long shot. Solomon followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Phoenicians, and Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. Solomon did what was wicked in the eyes of the eternal and did not remain loyal to the eternal like his father David. Then Solomon built a shrine for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, on the hill near Jerusalem, and one for Molech, the abomination of the Ammonites. And he did the same for all of his foreign wives who offered in sacrifice to their gods. If you haven't seen this before, it should shock you. One of the great kings of Israel worshipped other gods, built altars to other gods. And the text says, and it's because he was like, he was just loving 1,000 women. And whatever else that means, it was like, well, what does it mean? I mean, what's the connection, do you think, between all of these women that Solomon loved and his infidelity to God? Yael?
Well, there's a Hebrew expression, tafasta harbe lo tafasta klum. He's grabbing out for this emptiness within him that could only have been satisfied with the deep and real relationship with Hashem. So he's grabbing out for quick fixes, but none of it is satisfying. So that is reflected definitely in Kohelet. This emptiness, this avak, this dust that he feels inside.
Okay, great. So this is one way of looking at the Song of Songs. Song of Songs has been rendered as an allegory for our love for God, but it can also be thought of as a kind of a competition, in competition with our love for God. The human love is so enticing, overwhelming, captivating that we forget the love for God. That's in some ways an entirely different rendering than the one that is classically been remembered for. Right. Any other thoughts on that connection? All right. All right. Any other thoughts or questions at all before we actually start to look at this? What really is some of the most beautiful language I've ever come across? Anyone? Yeah, Florine.
I think there's a resolution in Ecclesiastes, because at that point I think he makes it clear that the conflicts among Jews, whatever the conflicts were, caused the destruction of the temple. So for me, I feel he's come back, made a circle, and came back to some kind of resolution in this, if you say it's his old age.
So let's hold that. Let's hold it. Let's stay with me for these 3 weeks if you can, and we'll be tracing this journey. We'll have an opportunity at the end to think about all the conversations we've had and how Ecclesiastes has been. Again, this is a device. I admit that this is based on a midrash, this idea, but there's something. It's a beautiful way to tour through this corpus of what I'm calling Solomonic poetry. Okay, let's see. Let's take a look, shall we? Let's head into the Song of Songs. Now, Song of Songs is many chapters long, and we're only going to get a chance to look at one, maybe two of them. But we have to just go slow. We have to really savor these words as the lovers are savoring their love. Right? So let's take a look. I hear someone unmuted. So if you're unmuted right now, I'm happy to call on you later, but try to mute again. Okay, let's take a look. And everybody should, I have this source sheet now. Let's take a look now. The Song of Songs by Solomon. Shir Hashirim Asher Lishlomo. And this is that opening that we're going to find at the beginning of all three books. This is the Song of Songs, and it is Solomon's song. And remember, the very first thing we said in this class, which is that the word shir is, yes, song, but also could mean poetry. Those two words are collapsed in Hebrew. So this is also the poem of poems, the ultimate poem by King Solomon. Okay. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to read just a few verses at a time. Yishikeni minashikos pihu, ki tovim dodecha miyayin. Kiss me with the kisses of your mouth, for your love is better than wine. L'reach shmanecha tovim, shemen turak shmecha, al kain alamot ahavucha. The scent of your oils is delightful, and your name is like a fine oil. So all the maidens love you. Moshcheni acharecha narutza, havyeni amelech hadarav, nagila v'nismecha bach. Nazkira dodecha miyayin, mesharim ahevucha. Draw me after you, let us run. The king has brought me into his chambers. Let us delight and rejoice in your love, savoring it more than wine. How they love you like the finest wine. Okay, so let's just start there. And let me ask a question I often ask in these classes, because I think you've learned that this is one of the great techniques of biblical poetry. Who's talking here? And in Song of Songs, more than in most books, the shifting of narrator is really important to track, because after all, we're following a dialogue between two lovers. So who is talking here? Who's saying kiss me with the kisses of your mouth? Who's talking?
A maiden?
Good. A woman, a maiden, a female voice, right? And a female voice talking to a male. There's a female figure and a male figure. They remain unnamed, right? So in some ways, it's just a story between two lovers, but we have some clues. Who is she? Who's this maiden talking to? Who's she talking about?
The king. She says, the king has brought me into his chambers.
Good, Anne. Good, great. Thank you. Very, very keen. Anne is helping us get right into it here. Kiss me with the kisses of your mouth. First of all, we have to follow the language. The language is just speaking to a male. Okay, and we get a sense that this voice is a woman, and a woman who is aware of some of the other women, the other maidens, and she is speaking to, or at least about, this king. Okay, now that's a complicated move, isn't it? Because who's the king? Who's the king? King is Solomon. So if we were to take the idea of Solomon as poet seriously, it is Solomon writing from the voice of the woman that he loves about how she loves him. That's the opening expression. Imagining this woman saying, kiss me, kiss me, kiss me, right? And the king has brought me into his chambers. Let me ask you this. What is it like, do you think, to love a king? This is a description here of loving a king. So what's that like? What do we see here in the descriptions of loving a king? We're already getting hints. Yeah, Judith.
Well, it sounds like it's like being drunk. So, there's lots of references and comparisons to alcohol. So it's like losing yourself in drink. You kind of lose your senses, you lose your control. And so that love, loving after a king, it's like a fantasy that a king would pay attention to you, bring you in. And, so yeah, it's a kind of delirium.
Good. One of the great metaphors in this first chapter is wine. Not just metaphors, right? But what do you call them? Is it similes? It's like wine. It's like being drunk. Being with you is like, I'm like out of my mind. I'm spinning, right? There's something like delirium, Judith says, something like a fantasy here. Because after all, how did you get to be with the king, right? Payam, please keep us going.
Are we sure this is a single voice? This sounds to me like a call and response, where the voice changes each verse to the other, and then at the end they come together. I mean, I don't know Hebrew, so I don't know if there's something distinctive in the Hebrew that's using male or female, but the first line can sound like Solomon himself, and then the narrator changes in the second line as a call and response to each other.
Meaning this is Solomon, this first line, Payam?
Number 2, kiss me with the kisses. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that we do end up having someone speaking to a male and someone speaking to a female, and we just know that from the verbs. And here, Yishakeni is, hey, you male, kiss me. Right? So that seems like we can assume that it's at this point, I mean, I guess it could be a guy talking to a guy, but we can assume later that it's a female saying kiss me. But Payam is right that it's tricky actually to keep track of who's talking when, and I've tried to do it, but please continue to challenge my readings. I have read these so far, these 2 through 4, as the woman speaking to the man. Okay. Soon we're going to see a switch in I think not the speaker but the addressee, but that's where we're holding for now. Let me just see. I'm just looking at the language here and seeing, is there another switch? This is also speaking to a male, and this is also speaking to a male. So I think so far we're going to hold with that reading. What else do we see here about kings and what it's like to love kings? I want to just highlight your name is like a fine oil. What's that got to? Well, who cares about your name? So all the maidens love you. All the maidens love you. Right? Think about that. And then of course, but I got brought into his chambers. I got taken all the way in, right? Matt Silberstein.
Just about the name thing, at the very least, that's the continuation of the power of names and the power of words that infuses and almost dominates the Tanakh. That naming of things is names have meaning, and names are real, and names are power throughout this. So it may be more than that, but it is at the very least that just jumped out at me.
Okay, I love that. That's a really nice reading because this is such exquisite poetry, and so we can also imagine, Matt is imagining the poet saying, I'm gonna you're enticing. The way you smell is enticing. But also the words that I'm gonna use themselves will be like our names will be, words will be these objects of delight. And so to the very words you're reading should have the aroma of love, right? So I like that reading. I mean, we're in the realm of poetry after all. Okay, now let's talk about euphemisms. Let's talk about euphemisms, shall we? Because we're going to see a lot of them. Where do we see a euphemism here? We've already seen one, and we're going to see some more. But where do we see euphemisms? By euphemisms, I mean an allusion to something that is not proper to speak of explicitly. I mean, I don't know. Maybe this isn't a euphemism, but the king has brought me into his chambers. Like, on the one hand, that's like, oh my gosh, you got to go inside the king's chambers. That's so nice. But what is it? What does that mean? What are the king's chambers? Okay, hold on to that, because in the next few lines you're going to see more euphemisms, and they get more and more playful as we go. Now, I think there is a voice switch here. So let's try and again ask who's talking and who's talking to whom. All right, so let's take a look. Next few lines here. Okay. Shchora ani v'na'ava b'not Yerushalayim. Ka'ohalei keder kiriyot Shlomo. I am dark and lovely, O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. Al tiruni shani shecharchoret. Shishazafatni hashemesh. Bnei imi nicharubi. Samuni notera et hakramim. Karmi shali lo natarti. Don't stare at me because I am swarthy, because the sun has gazed upon me. My mother's sons quarreled with me. They made me guard the vineyards, but my own vineyard I did not guard. Hagida li she'ava nafshi, eicha tireh, eicha tarbitz b'tzarayim shelama eyeh ke'otya al idrei chavarecha. Tell me, you whom I love so well, where do you pasture your sheep? Where do you rest them at noon? Why should I be like one of those who hangs around your friends' flocks? Okay, all right, so there's another little unit there. Now, who's talking to whom? Who's talking to whom? Can we do some identification? Anne helped us last time. Anyone want to take a crack at this? Who's dark and lovely?
It's the woman.
It's the woman. It's the woman. But who is she talking to?
The people, the ladies around her.
Right. And this is one of the dialogues. Is the woman is saying, oh, hey, girls. Hey, maidens of Jerusalem. Guess who I'm going out with? Right? Guess who I'm going out with? Now, so there's that like, oh, all the women love you. Now we've had a direct reference to Shlomo, if you saw it, the curtains of Solomon. All the women love you, but I'm inside. I got inside. Now, what is this? First of all, it's just a fascinating moment in thinking about the role that race and skin color plays in ancient Israel. And on the one hand, there's something, wow, like this is a moment where you see that someone can be, considered black and beautiful, right? But it's also complicated, right? So what is she saying? I am dark and lovely, and then she says another thing. Don't gaze upon me because I've been or don't stare at me because I've been sun drenched. So what is she saying? Why is she talking about her darkness, and why is she saying like stop staring at me? What's she describing here?
I mean, could it be that, high class ladies don't have to guard vineyards. They don't have to be in the sun. They can be inside weaving and, doing out of the sun things. And so maybe it's, don't judge me that I had to go out and, look after the farm, which is, we're not getting into the euphemisms of all that yet, but.
Yeah. We will in a sec.
But I wonder if that's
Anne's right on point once again. So I think that's I think is, I'm open to other interpretations, but that's what I think is the interpretation, the best interpretation of this darkness, because after all, it doesn't seem distinctly racial as we would use. It's the sun has made me darker, and that's because I think Anne's right. There's a class issue here. I'm one of the farm girls, right? I have to be out in the sun, but I'm beautiful anyway. He loves me anyway, right? Oh, daughters of Jerusalem, you high important daughters of Jerusalem you noble elite who are able to sit inside and keep your skin fair. Don't look at me, right? Because after all, my skin is dark and it's lovely, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon, like the royal purple curtains in Solomon's own temple, right? I look beautiful. You might look down on me, but I look beautiful. And there's another like allusion here to the working girl. And I don't mean that. I mean like a girl who works. My mother's sons quarreled with me, and they made me guard the vineyards. I had to work in the fields. They were like, get out here. You gotta work too. Okay. But then, okay, soon we're going to get into some more euphemisms. Speaking of guarding the vineyards, but I see some more hands up. So let's see what Matt has to say.
Isn't there midrash that this is the Queen of Sheba and that's why she's dark, or am I totally misremembering.
No, yeah, that's right. There is midrash on that. So the Queen of Sheba, a queen from Ethiopia, does explicitly come and visit Solomon in the Tanakh itself. And here, I actually thanks for reminding me, Matt, that I actually pulled up a picture, a rendering of that. Here are some of the this is like a Solomon and his wives picture. Like this is thinking about Solomon with his 1,000 wives. You know, there's like an old doddering man surrounded by, you know, I don't know, like breasts and frivolity. And look, they're pointing him towards these Greek-looking gods. This is all very white and European. Like it's like as if Solomon lived in like, you know, noble France. But whatever. This though is a spectacular picture that tries to imagine the Queen of Sheba meeting King Solomon, and them both just being these sort of figures of majesty and glory. So that is one of the renderings of I am dark and lovely, as I am the Queen of Sheba. But just following the language, I think I'm on Anne's side, that this represents a kind of, I come from the lower class, but I am with the king now. Okay, so let's look a little bit at, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot a couple of other hands, Yonatan and Pine.
Yeah, I have a real difficulty with the idea that this is, with the translation of dark. Like I've always only ever seen that translation. The word is explicitly black. I am black. And I think that there's a lot of like anti-blackness that goes into translating this as dark. She's black, right? She says it pretty dang explicitly. Sorry, I'm not accusing you of anti-blackness. I just think this is
look, it's a fair point. I think it's a tricky translation. In some ways, I didn't translate it as black because of the resonance that black has in our culture, where it so specifically refers to these racial categories that I'm not sure existed back then to begin with, but also because she speaks of being out in the sun. So I don't know, but fair enough. I am black and lovely. I like, fair enough.
Translate it the opposite way and say, I am black and lovely. Don't think that I'm only black because I tanned. I'm just black, right? Don't see me as black for tanning. That's who I am.
Okay. Yeah, I'm definitely open to that. I mean, after all, as I said, this is, there's a lot going on here, but at least some evidence that there's some idea that one could be the queen, and whiteness wasn't the standard of beauty. But yes, okay, so there's what to play with there or interpret there. Great, I appreciate that. All right, let's move forward a little bit. We're sort of coming down here to the last quarter hour, so let's move forward. I want to ask now about euphemisms, right? What other euphemisms did we see here, right? They made me guard the vineyards, but my own vineyard I didn't guard. This is like my favorite one in here. I didn't guard my vineyard. I just decided not to. And then tell me, you whom I love so well, where do you pasture your sheep? Where do you rest them at noon? Why should I be like one of those who hangs around your friend's flocks? What's she asking here? Like, what is she saying? Why? I don't want to be like one of those. What is she asking? Where do
she asking about his other wives?
Right. Or at least these other maidens. Like, there's all these people hanging around. I don't want to be just one of the girls. Where do you take me inside? Where do you go? Right? Give me the secret code. Give me the password. Right? I'm special. Other thoughts? Other interpretations? Okay. All right. So you have some euphemisms there, and now we're going to hear from someone else. The male, right? We know who that's going to be. The male figure, or Solomon himself, and he will respond in kind. Right? So just thinking about these euphemisms. So listen to how he responds here. First of all, we'll just read this one line, right? Because this first line is actually direct response. Im lo tedilach hayafa b'nashim, tzei lach be'ikvei hatzon, ure'i et gediotayich al mishkanot haroim. If you do not know, O fairest of women, go follow the tracks of the sheep and graze your little goats by the shepherd's tent. Okay. Now, I just want to say there is an image. This is an image which recurs in Jewish literature, rabbinic literature in particular, which is the shepherd's quarters, the shepherd's tents, that like things would happen out in the fields. A lot of the midrashim on the book of Exodus, like where would they have children? Where would they have sex? They'd go out into the shepherd's tents. They would go out into the fields. Like that was a place where nobody was. Okay, so that on some level, he's saying, oh, you're looking for where I pasture my sheep? Come on, just follow the tracks of the sheep. Find me out there in the fields. Okay, but let's keep reading, because we're going to continue to hear from this voice. Okay, and let's assume now that this voice is, I don't know, is Solomon, right? Because we've already said Solomon is writing this, and there's already been a reference to a king. I think that really helps with the next few verses. Okay, Solomon's about to get romantic, but even as Solomon gets romantic, we can begin to wonder, like, what is his vision of romance? L'susati berichve faro demitich rayati. I have likened you, my darling, to a mare in Pharaoh's chariots. Navu lechayaych batorim, tzvarech bacharuzim. Your cheeks are lovely with plaited wreaths, your neck with strings of jewels. Torei zahav na'aselach im nekudot hakasef. We will add wreaths of gold to your spangles of silver. Okay, that's interesting language. Oh wow, like she's so beautiful. She's like a mare and a horse in Pharaoh's chariots. She's got all this jewelry around her, and we're going to give her even more jewelry. What's Solomon's love vision here? What are the images that he is using to describe his affection? Let's see. I just want to try and call on people I haven't seen yet. Kareem.
It's really funny because he's basically like comparing her to an animal, and then it's very economic. Like, I'm just going to put necklaces on you, and even in contrast to her love in the beginning, which was super somatic and physical and romantic, and so it's just a big contrast. Yeah,
good. Solomon is his images of great beauty have to do with like wealth and money. And, he compares her to a mare in Pharaoh's chariot, which on the one hand is like, yes, it's comparing her to an animal, which seems like that's a strange, but I don't know, maybe he really thought a mare was beautiful. But not just that, a mare in Pharaoh's chariots? That doesn't seem like, that's not good. And in fact, one of the things that the Torah warns us is that a king should not go back to fetch horses from Egypt because they were known to have the greatest stallions. And Solomon, in addition to loving 1,000 women, goes and gets horses from Egypt. That's one of the things that he does. He violates all of the laws. So there's this way in which, like, we're seeing him casting aside the law. We're seeing him casting aside the rules as he pursues this woman that he's obsessed with, loves, feels, I don't know. But also comparing, like, I asked us to be suspicious of Solomon at the outset, so I think we're following my cue, and we're suspicious of the way that he's describing her as like this, almost like a jewel in his crown, right? And she used images too, but her images were like scent and wine, and his images are like gold and silver, right? So Hannah and then Jen.
This is just a overarching thought that just occurred to me about just thinking about the beginning of the class, and that in some ways I would think, oh, his reflections on love would have come later in life. Like, it seemed kind of strange that his wisdom about relationships would have been earlier in his life. And this moment to me is like, no, he was a child. Like, the way that the things about love and status and whatever else that he cared about in this moment, whatever it was, whether it was him reflecting back on it or writing it at the time, does feel very young. like doesn't sound to me like wisdom about love. Like it's like, it seems like you have some learning to do. And so I do think it's interesting that as a concept, it seems like, oh, maybe these reflections would have to come later in life. And this is a moment where I think you see his youth in some capacity, or you see some room for growth and development that maybe he didn't have. It seems like in his love life generally, like he was maybe making choices that some of us would look at we wouldn't hold it in such high regard. But this is one of those moments where you feel like, okay, this isn't his end of life understanding of what matters.
Yeah, very well said. Solomon is said to have ascended to the throne when he was around 15. And that fits, right? It's like a teenage boy's like, look at all the stuff I get, and pretty ladies too. I mean, I don't want to reduce it because this is an epic love poem, and Solomon is said to have written it, but there is something a little bit like objectifying, I guess is the word about this, right? Jen.
Well, just to add to that, I love like a young guy writing a poem about how excited a woman is to be picked by him. But I was thinking about the mare in Pharaoh's chariot, because if you're standing in the position of the chariot, if you're the person driving the chariot, on the one hand, like you're in charge of the mare, and on the other hand, the mare is always running ahead of you. Like you never catch the mare if you're the person in the chariot. And so I was just sort of thinking about the play in a lot of love poetry about I pursue you forever. And the woman saying, no, I come to you, I come to your tent. And then I'm thinking of him just sort of standing back, no, you run ahead, I'm in the chariot. Yeah, so that was an interesting dynamic.
That's just a lovely illustration. And it even as we poke holes a little bit in the maturity of Solomon's love, there is something about a mare in Pharaoh's chariot, the way Jen describes it. It's like he's not in control of her. He's trying to be, but she has some of the power. And it is significant that here he is describing, as Jen said, how much these ladies love me, but he also gives her the first voice, and she speaks with confidence. She speaks with a certain moxie, that is, you can tell why he loves her. You can tell why he's enchanted by her, because here's the king and everybody cowers before him. He can have any woman she wants, but she's like, I want to be the only one, right? You and me, like, get rid of, like, she's in charge here. Okay, maybe others will disagree with that interpretation. I'll open it up for more, but let's, as we come down closer to the end of our hour, let's make sure we get through this first chapter. And now we're gonna have a response again, right? We just heard from Solomon describing her. Now let's hear her describe him. And we pick up in verse 12. Ad shehamelech bimsibo nirdi natan recho. While the king was on his couch, my honeysuckle gave forth its fragrance. Sror hamor dodili ben shaddai yalin. My beloved to me is a bag of myrrh lodged between my breasts. Eshkol hakofer dodili, b'charmi ein gedi. My beloved to me is a spray of henna blooms from the vineyards of Ein Gedi. Okay, so what are the images that she is using? Right, we just saw him describing her as a golden object, an object of royalty, a mighty horse, but she's describing him, I don't know, is she describing him? Yeah, he's a bag of myrrh, right? The bag of myrrh is lodged between my breasts, right? Like, he's like a bag of myrrh lodged between my breasts. It's a funny way of saying he's lodged between my breasts, right? While the king was on his couch, my honeysuckle gave forth its fragrance. This is nard, and it's usually just translated as nard. I don't even know what nard is, so I looked it up. It's in the honeysuckle family, and that felt appropriately seductive to me. But my beloved to me is a spray of henna blooms from the vineyards of Ein Gedi. Okay, so this is her response, and we've just done a little bit of psychoanalyzing Shlomo. Like, let's psychoanalyze her. What does her imagery tell us about her? What is she? We've done some of this, but anyone want to add anything to what we're seeing about her and her love here? Let's circle back to Judith.
So she's clearly very sensual, you know. In the beginning, she's talking about fragrant oils and wine, and now she's talking about myrrh, you know, incense smells. So she's a very sensual person and is very, you know, much more aroused by scents and fragrance and feeling things, touching things. So very earthy, very down to earth.
Beautifully put, just beautifully put. Thank you, Judith. And that's right. This woman's, what she's enchanted by is just from the start, the aroma, the taste of wine, the scent of myrrh. That's what, and this is, let's imagine a poor working young woman who comes into the king's chambers. She's not looking at the gold. He's still thinking about it. She's not looking, she's just like, this is a sensory experience that's blowing my mind. And I'm loving it. And he becomes the sensory experience. He's the bag of myrrh, right? I'm smelling him and I'm giving forth fragrance, a real sensory experience. Anybody want to add to that? Okay. Let's take a look now at, so we have, let's see, we started with her speaking to him and then her turning and speaking to the other maidens of Jerusalem. And then she talks to him again, and then he responds to her, and then she responds to him. And now the last couple of lines here, the third and second to the end, are a little like, we're feeling this dialogue of back and forth, but actually never do we see it, I think, in the book so immediately and so directly as we do in these next couple of lines. Listen to the banter, really, to the back and forth here. Here. Hinach yafa rayati, hinach yafa inayich yonim. You are fair, my darling. You are beautiful with your dove-like eyes. Hincha yafe, dodi, af naim, af arseni ranana. And you, my beloved, are beautiful, lovely indeed. And our couch is so refreshing. Gotta love that. So you can see here that he says, you are lovely, you're so beautiful, right? And like, think about like the nature of their dialogue. She responds, yeah, you're beautiful too. You're beautiful too. She's not just the receiver of compliments. And she's not just the beautiful one while he's the wise. No, he's beautiful too. And by the way, he's not wise. And he's not powerful, and he's not wealthy. He's beautiful. He's beautiful, and it's great being on his couch together. Right? So it's like a little bit of like a sort of banter of dialogue here. And let me just read the last line here, and then we'll open it up for final thoughts. The last line, which seems in some ways like, is this the last line? But there's a lot here. The last line is Korot batenu arazim. Rahitenu barotim. Cedars are the beams of our house. Cypresses, the rafters. Okay, now we just heard about how refreshing it is to be lying on their couch. It was like the most, not even euphemism, it's just like erotic. And then all of a sudden the beams of our house are cedars and the posts are cypresses. What's that? Where's this house? What's the house with the cedar, with the cypress cross beams? What is this a reference to? You want to know?
The temple Solomon built in Jerusalem.
Yeah, exactly. The temple itself. The temple itself. They're doing it in the temple. They're doing it in the temple. Yeah, I mean, that's the idea here, right? It's like we wondered, is this a religious allegory or is it just essential? But it's much more complicated than that. It's like we are borrowing on all the institutions of the temple and the Holy of Holies and the relationship with God and the sacred. And explicitly, Solomon says, our love takes place in the temple. We are in the Holy of Holies. I will bring you inside, and I will bring you inside my bedroom, but I will also bring you inside God's bedroom, right? And we will love each other, and we will unite, but in doing so, we will unite with God. And that religious allegory is alive. It's alive. It's a part of this, even as it is. I mean, it's almost like a dirty joke, right? So it's really, it's explicit and it's erotic, but it is also holy, right? And that's the great tension of the Song of Songs. Okay, what do you, any last sort of reflections or thoughts?
I mean, it feels like he's acting like a pharaoh. I mean, the pharaohs did, make marriages to accumulate wealth. I mean, if you married a princess, you would get a dowry. And I wonder if this is also, I mean, this is so unromantic and economic, but I wonder if it's in some way also saying that these marriages, the dowries he's accumulating are building the temple.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I mean, there are lots of ways to read this, and in some ways, we can read the love right out of it if we want. I mean, I've called this a love poem, sort of naturally. But is this love, or is this lust? Is it just sensuality? And is it? I mean, we're talking about a man who was later described as marrying more people than many of us will like meet in a lifetime, and becoming completely twisted and distracted by that obsession. So like, what exactly, how, like, this is the king who can have anything. Like, how much of that are we reading here as we begin to trace the life's journey of this guy? Are we seeing the great love of his life? Are we seeing the beginning of like a kind of acquisition of the things I like, is that also part of it? And that's also the temple, and it's also, right, so there's lots of things going on. Looks like I'm getting a call. Fine. Okay, let's see. Anyone not had a chance to speak yet? You haven't spoken in a while.
The more I hear the metaphors, the more convinced I am that it's the Queen of Sheba. She is a woman. She's not a Betula. She's not a little maiden. She's the one who's strong and muscular and shining. And she has the confidence to come to him as a completed woman. And the plaited hair, the braids, everything is different. He's intoxicated by her difference. She comes to him and she's not like a little girl or a young woman who needs to be decorated with his gold. She comes with her own. She's decorated already with her hair plaited and all of these exotic differences. And even the rehot, even the fragrances that she gives off are different. She's African. And I think he's intoxicated by that.
Yeah. Okay. That's a theory. I mean, look, there's something. If we imagine this is Solomon, we have to decide why this woman, of all the thousands of women, is the one, and there's a theory. Like, she was the other Solomon. She was the great queen on the other side, right? Emil.
I was going just to go back to the beginning when you said Rabbi Akiva called this the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Is that kind of part of like the punchline of the poem? Is he sort of alluding to that it's in the temple, or like what does he mean by that? Like, is he reading it allegorically, or is he just saying, even on its own merits, this is really important to? Yeah,
I mean, look, it is possible to understand Rabbi Akiva to be a frummy, right? Like, they're all saying, oh, this is erotic, like, this is just too weird, we can't put this in the Bible. And he's saying, no, you're misunderstanding. It's not about that, it's about God. But I would like to believe that Rabbi Akiva understands the depth of this, that it is an allegory, but it's an allegory that works both ways, that it is a comparison of the love the love that human beings have for God is being compared to the love that exists between two people. And that means that our love for God has a sensual, an erotic element even, but it also means that our eros with each other is divine. Right? And that's the great power of the Song of Songs. That's the great power, is that it works both ways. Okay, I have another passage here that is my favorite passage in the Song of Songs that I thought maybe we'd end on. There's a song that's associated with it, but we're over time, so I just leave it to you to look over. It's just I mean, there's much more to do here, but I think we'll leave it here for tonight, and we'll consider ourselves having taken a look at the young lover, Solomon the young lover, and we'll keep that in mind if you join me again next week, and we'll look at what is the Solomon who is the Solomon that we actually meet in the Bible, who is the king in the fullness of his powers, and how will this earlier Solomon inform that journey that we're going to be tracking. So thank you, everybody. Good to be with you here tonight. I want to tell you that Hillel has a car behind the music session that's starting at 8 if you're interested. And take a look at an email that recently went out about a bunch of new classes that are coming your way this semester. It's a pleasure to be able to learn together through this crazy time. Really is the source of my life's strength these days. I appreciate you all. All right.
It's been wonderful. It's been so good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.